Thanksgiving morning arrived the way it always did in Morenci, Michigan, slow, gray, and unremarkable. The kind of morning that doesn't announce itself. No dramatic sunrise. No warning signs. Just cold air clinging to the windows and the quiet hum of a small town waking up. For Tanya Zuvers, the day already felt wrong. She moved through her home on autopilot, watching her 3 boys get ready to leave. Andrew, 9 years old, already carrying the weight of being the oldest. Alexander, 7, observant and sensitive, always reading the room. Tanner, just 5, still small enough to disappear into furniture, still young enough to believe everything adults told him. They weren't going far. Just a short Thanksgiving visit with their father, John Skelton. Court-ordered. Temporary. One night. Tanya had followed every rule. She always had. The marriage was over, but the paperwork remained. Custody schedules. Drop-off times. Agreements written in ink that didn't account for instincts. Or fear. Or the quiet voice in a mother's chest that says something isn't right. She hugged them longer than usual. Andrew noticed. He always did. "Mom," he said, gently pulling back. Try and be brave for his brothers. "We'll be back tomorrow." She smiled because she had to. Because mothers learn how to lie with their faces long before the world teaches them how to lie with words. John Skelton arrived without drama. No raised voice. No argument. He wasn't angry. That was almost worse. He was calm, flat. His expression didn't rise or fall as the boys gathered their overnight bags and stepped outside. Tanya watched from the doorway as they climbed into his vehicle. This would be the last confirmed moment anyone could say with certainty that Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner were alive. She stood there long after the car disappeared down the street, staring at the empty space it left behind. She would later say she felt something collapse inside her, but at the time, she pushed the feeling away. Mothers do that too. They rationalize fear. They label it anxiety. They tell themselves they're overreacting. Thanksgiving came and went. The hours passed slowly, then faster. Evening crept in. Tanya, prepared for the boys' return the next day. Their beds waited. Their shoes stayed by the door. Morning came, and they didn't. At first, she waited. Sometimes John was late. Sometimes he pushed boundaries. She told herself this was nothing, just another frustration she'd have to document later. She called him. No answer. She called again, straight to voicemail. By midday, the quiet had become unbearable. Tanya drove to John's home. It looked normal. Too normal. No movement. No boys in the yard. No sound from inside. When police arrived and knocked on the door, John Skelton answered calmly. Too calmly. He didn't ask why they were there. He didn't seem surprised. When officers asked where the boys were, he didn't hesitate. He didn't stumble. He didn't search for words. He said he had given them away. Not to family. Not to friends. To a woman named Joan Taylor. The name meant nothing to anyone. No one in Morenci knew her. No records turned up. No phone calls. No messages. No trace. It was as if she had never existed. As the hours turned into panic, the story began to shift. Now it wasn't a woman. It was an organization. A group. He wouldn't say which one. Wouldn't say where. Wouldn't say why. Meanwhile, the absence of the boys became loud. Deafening. Their silence filled the town. Amber alerts lit up phones across Michigan. Faces printed on flyers. 3 smiling school photos frozen in time. Andrew's serious eyes. Alexander's cautious grin. Tanner's baby teeth still visible when he smiled. Volunteers search fields. Woods. Roadsides. Every place children could wander. Every place fear could imagine. But no one was looking the one place everyone kept circling back to. Their father. Then, just as pressure tightened around him, John Skelton did something else. He tried to disappear too. He was found injured, hospitalized, alive. The boys were still gone. For Tanya, the world stopped making sense. Thanksgiving had ended, but the holiday never left her house. The calendar moved forward, but time didn't. The boys' room stayed the same. Their clothes stayed folded. Their voices echoed in spaces they no longer occupied. Every day that passed without answers became heavier than the one before it. Because missing is not empty. Missing is loud. Missing is endless. And somewhere in the space between what John Skelton said and what he refused to explain, a truth was already settling in, one no one was ready to say out loud. Not yet. By the time the Amber Alert spread across Michigan, Tanya had already stopped sleeping. Phones buzzed in grocery stores, gas stations, living rooms. 3 faces stared back from glowing screens, her sons, smiling the way children do when they don't know they're being photographed for something terrible. Strangers began to recognize them before she could. People she had never met were suddenly closer to her children than she was. The town mobilized quickly. Morenci was small, the kind of place where news didn't travel. It settled. Patrol cars rolled slowly down back roads. Volunteers fanned out across fields and tree lines, calling out names that never answered back. Helicopters cut through the gray sky, their low thrum pressing against everyone's nerves. At the center of it all sat John Skelton. When detectives interviewed him again, they expected cracks, confusion, fear, something human. Instead, they got composure. His voice stayed level. His answers were short, deliberate, almost rehearsed. He repeated the story about the woman, Joanne Taylor. He said he'd met her online, said she wanted to help, said she could give the boys a better life. When asked where she lived, he couldn't say. When asked how to contact her, he had no number, no email, no last name that led anywhere real. Investigators checked anyway. They always do. There was no Joanne Taylor, no matching records, no social media history, no trace she had ever crossed paths with John Skelton or anyone else. When confronted with that fact, John didn't react the way innocent people usually do. He didn't panic. He didn't try to fix the story. He simply adjusted it. Now it wasn't a woman. It was an organization. He said he had given the boys to a group that would protect them from what he never clarified. When pressed, he leaned back and closed himself off. He said naming them would put the boys in danger. He said investigators wouldn't understand. To Tanya, each new version felt like being pulled underwater. She sat through interviews listening to people repeat his words back to her, trying to make sense of them, trying to see logic where none existed. She replayed her last conversation with Andrew over and over, searching for signs she might have missed. Had he sounded scared? Had he hesitated before leaving? Had she mistaken bravery for certainty? Every unanswered question turned inward. Law enforcement expanded the search. They tracked John's movements through cell phone pings, toll records, surveillance footage. His phone had gone dark for hours after the boys vanished. When it came back on, it placed him across state lines in Ohio. Why Ohio? He offered no explanation. Officers searched his home. They went through drawers, closets, computers. What they found wasn't evidence in the traditional sense. No blood, no weapons, but it was unsettling. Items that felt symbolic rather than practical. A noose. Notes scribbled with vague language about protection and sacrifice. Internet searches that circled around disappearances and death without naming them directly. Nothing that could stand alone in court. Everything that felt wrong. Meanwhile, John continued to talk, just enough to keep hope alive, just enough to waste time. He sent police to wooded areas, abandoned buildings, remote locations where nothing waited but disappointment. Each false lead drained resources and energy. Each one kept Tanya suspended between terror and belief. Because as long as someone was searching, it meant there was still something to find. The public watched closely. Sympathy for a missing family slowly hardened into suspicion. People began asking the question everyone else was afraid to voice. Why wasn't he helping? Why wouldn't he say where they were? John Skelton didn't cry at press conferences. He didn't plead. When cameras were on him, his face stayed neutral, almost distant, as if the story belonged to someone else. As if 3 missing children were an abstract problem to be solved rather than his son's. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Just days after the disappearance, John was found injured. He had attempted to take his own life. He survived. For some, it looked like guilt. For others, desperation. For Tanya, it felt like abandonment layered on top of betrayal. Even now, even here, he was choosing silence over truth. At the hospital, detectives waited for clarity. They didn't get it. John spoke in fragments. He hinted at knowledge, then pulled it back. He suggested the boys were alive, then refused to prove it. He positioned himself as the only one who truly knew what was happening, and the only one unwilling to say it. Legally, investigators were trapped. Without bodies, without a location, without a confession, they couldn't charge him with murder. The law needed certainty. Tanya had none. What they could prove was simple and devastating. John Skelton had violated a custody order. He had taken the boys and failed to return them. It wasn't justice. It was something. As weeks passed, the searches slowed. Media attention drifted. Flyers faded on telephone poles. The world kept moving, even as Tanya remained frozen in the space where her children should have been. Birthdays came and went. 3 empty chairs. 3 untouched cakes. 3 names spoken into quiet like prayers that never landed. And still, John Skelton said nothing. Not where, not how, not why, only that he knew something everyone else didn't. And that knowledge, whatever it was, had swallowed her sons whole. Silence can be louder than screaming. After the searches slowed and the cameras drifted away, what remained was John Skelton's refusal to explain himself. Not denial, not outrage, just a quiet, impenetrable wall that no one could get through. For investigators, that silence became the case. For Tanya, it became the thing she woke up to every morning and carried with her every night. John Skelton was eventually charged, not with murder, not with anything that spoke to the magnitude of what had been lost, but with unlawful imprisonment. The law could prove he had taken the boys. It could prove he had kept them from their mother. It could not prove what had happened after. He pleaded no contest, no courtroom confession, no tears, no final words for his sons. Just a sentence, up to 15 years. When the gavel came down, Tanya didn't feel relief. Relief implies an ending. This felt like a pause. A door closed without revealing what was behind it. John entered prison carrying the one thing no one else had, answers, and that knowledge, real or imagined, became his power. From behind bars, he remained exactly as he had been outside them, controlled, elusive. He spoke to no one who could force the truth out of him. He refused interviews, refused deals, refused to give the boy's mother even a sentence of certainty. Psychologists who later reviewed the case struggled to place him neatly into a category. He wasn't explosive. He wasn't impulsive. He didn't fit the stereotype of a man who snapped in a moment of rage. Instead, everything about John Skelton suggested deliberation, planning, resentment that fermented quietly. People close to the situation would later describe him as someone who needed control. Not loud control, not violent dominance, but the kind that comes from withholding, from deciding what information exists and who gets to have it, from being the only person in the room who knows how the story ends. For Tanya, this realization was unbearable. She replayed the marriage in her mind, searching for the beginning of the end, the arguments, the custody battle, the moments where his calmness had felt unnerving instead of reassuring. She remembered the way he talked about the boys, not with warmth, but with ownership, as if they were extensions of himself rather than people with lives unfolding beyond him. Experts call it a form of emotional annihilation. If the parent can no longer control the family, they erase it, not always through violence, sometimes through disappearance, through vanishing in a way that leaves no closure and no body to mourn. Inside prison, John Skelton became an absence within an absence. He kept to himself, avoided conflict, did not seek redemption. He did not attend programs meant for remorse or rehabilitation. There was nothing in his behavior that suggested regret. Only patience. Time for him was a tool. Outside the prison walls, Tanya lived in a different kind of confinement. She marked time by what her son should have been doing. Andrew would have started high school. Alexander would have grown into his quiet confidence. Tanner would have lost his baby teeth. Instead, their ages froze. She kept their rooms intact long after people told her it wasn't healthy. But to change them felt like erasing proof that they had been real, that they had existed beyond missing posters and court documents. Every year she petitioned. Every year she asked for more to be done. And every year she was told the same thing. Without new evidence, there was nothing more the system could offer her. John Skelton knew this. He knew that as long as he said nothing, the case would remain suspended, too heavy to dismiss, too incomplete to prosecute fully. The absence of bodies wasn't just a problem for investigators. It was leverage, and he held it tightly. Occasionally, rumors surfaced, jailhouse whispers, hints that he had talked to other inmates, suggestions that he had revealed something in fragments. Each time, hope surged. Each time, it collapsed under scrutiny. Nothing concrete ever came out. What did emerge, slowly, was a clearer psychological picture. This was not a man who lost control. This was a man who exercised it. He had removed the boys from their mother in the most absolute way possible. He had ensured that she would never fully move on, never bury them, never stop wondering where they were, whether they were cold, whether they had been afraid, whether they had called for her. That uncertainty became the punishment. For Tanya, grief was not a straight line. It looped back on itself. Some days she believed the boys were alive, hidden somewhere, waiting to be found. Other days, the weight of reality pressed too hard to ignore. Both versions hurt equally. John Skelton never corrected either belief. As his release date slowly approached, something shifted. For years, the system had told Tanya to be patient, to wait, to hope time would produce answers. Now, time threatened to take something away. If John walked free without ever speaking, the silence would follow him out, and the boys would still be gone. Behind prison walls, John Skelton remained exactly where he wanted to be. At the center of a story no one else could finish. A story where he controlled the ending by refusing to give one. But pressure has a way of building. And after more than a decade of waiting, the silence that once protected him was about to be tested in a way it never had before. Because soon, the law would be forced to ask a different question. Not where are the boys, but what if they are never coming back? Time did not move forward for Tanya Zoovers. It stacked itself on top of her. Each year after the boys disappeared felt heavier than the last. Not because anything changed, but because nothing did. Andrew should have been taller than her by now. Alexander should have been finding his voice. Tanner should have been running ahead of her instead of holding her hand. Instead, they remained the same ages in her mind. Forever 9, 7, and 5, trapped in the moment they walked out the door with their father. The case files grew thicker, but the truth inside them did not. Detectives rotated out. New faces reviewed old notes, circled the same unanswered questions, reached the same dead ends. Without bodies, without a confession, the law was paralyzed. Suspicion was not enough. Grief was not enough. Even certainty, when it lived only in the heart, was not enough. John Skelton sat in prison, his sentence ticking down with quiet precision. 15 years sounded long when it was first handed down. Over time, it became terrifyingly short. Every passing month was a reminder that the system had a limit to how long it could hold him without more evidence. And John knew that too. Tanya attended hearings and anniversaries in equal measure. She spoke at vigils where candles flickered in the cold, and people whispered condolences they didn't know how to phrase anymore. Still praying, they would say, or any updates, as if answers were something she was choosing not to share. Inside her home, the boys' presence lingered stubbornly. Their room stayed the same not out of denial, but defiance. If the world insisted on forgetting, she refused to help along. Their clothes still smelled like laundry detergent and time. Their toys gathered dust, but never moved. To pack them away felt like an admission she wasn't ready to make. Years passed. The case became what investigators call cold. But cold cases are never actually cold to the families living inside them. They are just quieter, less visible, less urgent to people whose lives are not built around absence. John Skelton remained silent through it all. He never offered to cooperate in exchange for leniency, never hinted at remorse, never gave Tanya even the smallest mercy of knowing whether her sons had been afraid in their final moments, or if they even had final moments at all. What he did do was wait. As his release date approached, pressure mounted behind the scenes. Prosecutors reviewed the case again. They knew public trust would fracture if he walked free without consequence beyond the custody violation. But the law does not move on outrage. It moves on proof. And there still was none. Then Tanya made a decision that felt, in some ways, like betrayal. She asked the court to declare her sons legally dead. It was not a statement of certainty. It was an act of survival. Declaring them dead did not mean she had stopped hoping. It meant she could no longer live in a legal limbo where her children were neither here nor gone. The declaration would allow her to grieve openly, to mark an ending that the law had refused to acknowledge for years. The hearing was quiet. No bodies were presented. No cause of death listed. Just a calendar and a reality everyone in the room had avoided naming. 14 years had passed. The judge granted the request. Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner Skelton were declared deceased, their date of death set as the day after Thanksgiving in 2010. For Tanya, the ruling landed like a physical blow. It made the loss official without making it any easier to understand. But it also did something else. It shifted the ground beneath the case. Because once the boys were legally recognized as dead, the question changed. Prosecutors were no longer waiting for remains to justify action. They were now confronting a father who had outlived the legal existence of his children while refusing to explain why. Behind prison walls, John Skelton's silence suddenly carried more risk than protection. His release date loomed. Public attention returned. Investigators began connecting what they had long believed but never formalized. His lies, his movements, his manipulation of time and hope. The patterns that once seemed circumstantial began to form a narrative, not of uncertainty, but of intent. And just as John prepared to step back into the world he had left suspended, the system that had waited so long made its move, because the law had finally caught up to what Tanya had known for years. Some silences are not the absence of truth. They are the truth itself. When the decision finally came, it did not arrive with celebration or relief. It arrived quietly, like everything else in this case had. No sirens, no breaking news banner that could undo what had already been done. Just paperwork, charges, words that were supposed to carry weight after 15 years of waiting. Murder, 3 counts, 1 for each child. For Tanya Zuvers, the moment felt unreal. For more than a decade, she had lived in a world where the truth was obvious but unspoken, where everyone circled the same conclusion without daring to land on it. Now the system was saying it out loud, not because her sons had been found, not because a confession had surfaced, but because time itself had closed every other door. Prosecutors laid out what they had always believed but could never prove beyond doubt. John Skelton was the last person to see the boys alive. He had given contradictory stories that collapsed under even minimal scrutiny. He had led investigators in circles. He had attempted to end his own life days after the disappearance. And for years afterward, he had chosen silence over cooperation, even as his children remained missing. There were still no bodies. There was still no map. There was still no explanation for how 3 children could vanish without leaving a trace. But there was something else now. Context, pattern, a story told not through evidence recovered, but through evidence withheld. John Skelton appeared in court older than the man who had taken his sons away, grayer, thinner, but unchanged where it mattered. He did not react when the charges were read. He did not look toward the gallery. He did not look like a man finally cornered. He looked like someone who had expected this moment all along. Bond was set impossibly high. He would not be walking free. For the public, the charges felt overdue. For Tanya, they felt complicated. Validation does not erase loss. Accountability does not resurrect the dead. But for the first time, the law was no longer pretending this was a mystery without a likely answer. The boys were gone, and their father was responsible. Still, the most painful truth remained untouched. John Skelton did not tell anyone where his sons were. He did not say what happened to them. He did not offer Tanya the mercy of knowing whether they were together, whether they were afraid, whether they called out for her in their final moments. He kept that to himself. In court filings, prosecutors acknowledged what everyone already knew. This case might never have a traditional ending. There may never be remains to recover. There may never be a confession. The story might always end in silence. But silence, they argued, was no longer protection. It was evidence. Tanya listened as the legal language wrapped around her children's names. Andrew, Alexander, Tanner. Names that once echoed through her house now existed in court transcripts and headlines. She wondered what they would have looked like as teenagers. As adults, she wondered if they would recognize the world she lived in now, a world shaped by waiting. After the hearing, reporters gathered outside, asking the same question they have been asking for 15 years. Do you feel closure? There is no such thing as closure when your children disappear. There is only truth and the absence of it. For Tanya, justice did not mean answers. It meant that the system had finally stopped asking her to pretend this was something other than what it was. It meant that her sons were no longer a footnote in a custody violation, no longer suspended in the language of missing. They were acknowledged. They were mourned. They were named. John Skelton returned to his cell with the same secret he had always carried. Whatever happened after Thanksgiving 2010 remains locked inside him. Whether that silence will ever break is a question time has not yet answered. But what has changed is this. The world is no longer waiting for him to speak in order to believe what happened. The boys are no longer lost in uncertainty. They are remembered. And the man who took them is finally being held to account. Not for what he refuses to say, but for what his silence has already told us. Some stories never give us the ending we want, only the truth we are forced to accept.